This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to answer the question, is Bitcoin unfair to late adopters? And this question was inspired by a question from Nathan Nguyen in yesterday's video. Hey Matthew, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. A finance PhD classmate and I were discussing money, the state, and Bitcoin. We agree on some things, for example, liking Thomas Sowell, preferring smaller government. But when it came to Bitcoin, he was skeptical. He brought up the usual tulip bubble and illegal activity arguments, but also took issue with early adopters benefiting. His main question, why should late adopters support Bitcoin if it primarily rewards those who got in early? It's a similar question to this, why should late adopters support Amazon if it primarily rewarded early adopters and investors? Well, that's because Amazon is actually really convenient and amazing. Not to minimize all the critiques of Amazon over the years, but even most of Amazon's critics still use Amazon occasionally. And likewise, Bitcoin is really useful as a store of value and censorship-resistant medium of exchange. Pache its critics, Bitcoin has lots of real utility, and if it didn't, it wouldn't have an almost $2 trillion market cap. The question is, has there ever been a new tech, new invention, new paradigm that didn't disproportionately benefit early adopters who had the vision and the foresight to pay attention and take action? Should we not use crude oil or cars because Rockefeller and Ford got really rich from them and we didn't? Actually, Rockefeller and Ford made everyone in the world a little bit richer and gave us a higher standard of living, like most entrepreneurs. I contributed absolutely nothing to these revolutions, and yet I benefit from them every day of my life when I drive my car. So why do people only apply this sort of critique to Bitcoin? Why don't more people say, well, I'm not going to use gold because my grandfather paid $35 an ounce for his gold, and now I have to pay $3,000 an ounce or whatever it is. I'm not going to live in a house because my grandfather paid $20,000 for his first house. I'm not going to buy Apple stock because early investors got their shares for pennies. Thing about early investments like this, early investors in Apple and every other startup, they took on enormous risk, risking 100% of their capital. And I know what it feels like to invest in a startup and lose 100% of your investment because I've done it many times. I've also had some big winners as well. Early investors in Bitcoin took on an enormous risk as the network was unproven and could have been easily shut down by governments in the early days when it was still small and relatively centralized. Early Bitcoin investors also risked jail time if things had gone a bit differently, even in the US and certainly in other countries. Many Bitcoin investors did end up in jail in some countries. Early Bitcoin investors had to watch their investments go up 10x, let's say from $1 to $10, and still not sell. And this is really, really hard. It's very difficult to let your winners run in investing, and almost no one can hodl or hold an investment for 5 years, much less 15 or 16 years. If you're finding this video interesting so far, I just ask you to help to support this channel's educational mission. Hit the subscribe button, that does really help. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video, and share this video with a friend or family member. Bitcoin would never have succeeded if it weren't for early adopters hodling Bitcoin and not dumping it, and really just believing in it. These people I consider to be heroes because while I was telling people that Bitcoin was a scam and a bubble, these early adopters were carrying the torch and preserving Satoshi's sacred fire for future generations. Most of them never got super rich either, but many were able to pay their medical bills, like Hal Finney's family, buy a house, send a kid to private school, travel around the world for 6 months, remodel the kitchen, or whatever. Bitcoin's freedom money for everyone who uses it, whether you're an early adopter or a late adopter. This leads to the question, did Bitcoin have a fair distribution? I would say yes, it did, unlike both fiat and other cryptocurrencies. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it certainly has the fairest distribution of any money that I'm aware of. By contrast, most cryptocurrencies are issued by a small group of insiders who set aside free coins for themselves, this so-called pre-mine, allowing them to dump on retail investors without needing to first register for an IPO. Unlike Ethereum and every other crypto, Bitcoin did not even have a price for the first 16 months of its existence. It started off as a novelty and collectible, and its growth was beautifully slow and organic, allowing time for the Bitcoin network to grow under the radar. Bitcoin's monetization was organic and spontaneous. Unlike any other cryptocurrency, it wasn't artificially engineered by venture capitalists and marketers and paid influencers, as continues to happen in the quote-unquote crypto industry, which is not really a real industry. Bitcoin's path to monetization was free from unethical pre-mines, pre-sales, and pump and dumps. Most of the early holders of Bitcoin were cypherpunks, math nerds, computer science nerds, cryptographers, and people whose primary interest was not financial. As we said before, hodling Bitcoin for the long term requires incredible self-control, a deep understanding of its value, and nerves of steel to handle the volatility as well. This is why even if every person on Earth were initially airdropped a fair portion of Bitcoin in the early days as part of the initial distribution, most people would not have valued it and would instead have dumped it or lost it, similar to what took place with the Russian voucher program in the 1990s, when ownership in all of the Russian or the previous Soviet companies were given to people. They were given these vouchers, and most of them just sold them to smarter people who knew the value of them. Even today, you can get over 1,000 sats for just $1, over 1,100 sats for just $1, and most people still don't care. These are the same people who in 10 years from now, when Bitcoin is at $2 million per coin, are going to be telling you that you don't deserve your wealth and you just got lucky and it's just not fair and that the government should redistribute some of your wealth to them. But unlike fiat, Bitcoin is a voluntary and opt-in system. This makes it even more fair because you don't have a gun put to your head as you do with fiat money. If I don't pay my taxes using US dollars, I go to jail. And I never opted into this system, unlike Bitcoin, which is voluntary and opt-in. No one is forcing you to use Bitcoin, but rather you're free to use Bitcoin or scammy crypto or unfair fiat instead. The choice is completely yours. So Bitcoin has had the most fair distribution of any money in history, I would say, and it's impossible to recreate since now the cat's out of the bag and everyone knows how it's done. I love this quote from Knut Svanholm, The One-Shot Principle. Absolute mathematical scarcity achieved by consensus in a sufficiently decentralized distributed network was a discovery rather than an invention. It cannot be achieved again by a network made up of participants aware of this discovery, since the very thing discovered was resistance to replicability itself. And this is why there can never be another Bitcoin. You want to know about a monetary system that's actually not fair, though? It's the fiat financial system, and this is what people should be railing against, and this is what Bitcoiners rail against. Most people have to work for this money, this fiat money, spending long hours away from their families, sitting in traffic, sitting in cubicles under fluorescent lights, inhaling industrial carpet and paint off-gassing, while a small group of people, central bankers, get to print up the same money for free. Fiat is an inherently unfair system where the government and central bankers get to siphon off your economic energy, and yet somehow there are no mass protests, no headlines, no outrage about any of this, except for very small circles of libertarians and Bitcoiners. Instead, the government and the legacy media tries to get you upset about an emergent ethical financial system called Bitcoin. This is complete and utter clown world thinking. We can also ask the question, did I receive my fair distribution of Bitcoin? I was literally the definition of a sophisticated investor back in 2011. I had a high net worth and I'd helped to start and grow a $2 billion hedge fund. And so what did I do when I first heard about Bitcoin from a friend in 2011? Did I buy even one Bitcoin just to test it out? This was when Bitcoin was about $1 per coin. No, I didn't even have the energy or interest to buy a single Bitcoin. I did nothing. I wrote it off as a fad, bubble scam, without doing even an hour of research. Is this someone else's fault? Is this someone else's fault because I waited until 2019 to start stacking seriously? No, of course not. It's my fault. And you can probably apply the same critique to yourself. When did you first hear about Bitcoin on the news? 2012, 2013, maybe 2016, 2017 at the latest. Did you take action at the time? Did you spend even 10 minutes looking into it? Probably not. And you have to ask yourself, is that the fault of early Bitcoin adopters, who were a generous bunch shouting Bitcoin from the rooftops to the annoyance of everyone else at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner, at the dinner table, at family reunions? These were the annoying people, and we always ignored them as we continue to ignore them. And now many of us are shouting from the rooftops, and our friends and family are still ignoring us. To go back to this comment, I think I should read the rest of it. I think Nathan's response here was good. I responded that all forms of money, gold, silver, seashells, had early adopters who gained an advantage. And that's just how markets work. Plus, early Bitcoin adopters took on a significant risk. I think that's right, when the network was unproven. His friend didn't like that answer. He then suggested a government-backed Bitcoin 2.0 with a fixed exchange rate for fairness. I asked who secures the network. he had no answer. This idea of having a fixed exchange rate for fairness for Bitcoin doesn't even make any sense. A fixed exchange rate with what? Presumably with US dollars. But why in the world would you want that when the US dollar is a melting ice cube? And this would be very difficult to peg, especially since Bitcoin has a limited supply, whereas US dollars have an unlimited supply. At the end of this comment, let me just read the end. I'm curious about your thoughts on early adopters' advantage. Some argue it leads to hoarding and weakens Bitcoin as a currency. It's actually the opposite. When people hodl Bitcoin, it makes Bitcoin stronger as a currency, but I don't see an issue with first mover advantage. Just some notes on this terminology of hoarding. Hoarding is a government-designed propaganda term to disparage people who live within their means and produce more than they consume. This was the critique that FDR applied to Americans who were holding gold in 1933 or 1934. He called them hoarders. People who produce more than they consume and then invest the difference in gold, stocks, and real estate. These are called savers. They really shouldn't be called hoarders. And this is not a bad thing. Saving, hoarding is the foundation of capital formation and capitalism in general. You cannot invest in new technologies, new companies, or really anything if you spend more than you earn. And neither can corporations or even nation states. Nation states can print up money, but doing that devalues the money that's currently in existence. So there is no free lunch in economics, and hoarding or saving really is the foundation of civilization. And what really kicked off human progress was when Mesopotamians and Egyptians realized that they could store grain, for example, instead of having to hunt and gather every single day. And unlike wheat, Bitcoin's not going to give you a leaky gut or anything like that, and it doesn't rot. It's not exposed to rats who can eat it, etc. So Bitcoin is a very, very new, interesting monetary technology. It's had an extremely fair distribution, and for this reason, it's going to be the new foundation for money in the coming decades. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.